I considered this week actually just showing like the output and having a working build, but I had a very trying 2 days with virtual agents. And I thought instead for week 4 being the final week, I would at least get a video up and I'll put some code up just for the merits of the competition and explain I mean, I'll title this video something like failure mode of all the things that can go wrong and just kind of talk through some of that. So let me talk about the first problem, which is that my virtual team has exhausted, and it's only the 7th now of March, but my budget for the month, not just for my API tokens budget, but my Codex command line weekly budget. And that's also on the free account that I also have, and also my plus account that I have. So I have a Teams for the family. I have a plus account that I have been meaning to cancel, but inevitably I'm like, oh, I still have that plus account. I'll use that when I run out of tokens. And so now I find myself in a situation where it's like, okay, I have no tokens anywhere. But you might say, what about something like Olama? Well, I have Olama set up as well. And then the virtual agents crash the machine. It's been a very, very difficult week. Let me talk about what I mean by virtual agents. Let's do it this way. Um, I have this open up, and so this will just be me talking about failure modes, and not that I'm going to have any solutions this week, just the problems I'm running into. Maybe just me talking through it, I'll come up with a good solution. So let's talk about this at a high level. So I mentioned before that we have agent an OpenClaw instance 1, 2, and 3, right? So I'm going to take this and do 2. Figma is probably not the best tool for this, but it's the tool I have because I don't need yet another subscription. I probably should vibe code a replacement for like doing charts online. I just haven't got there yet. So this is a OpenClaw. We'll just consider that's my OpenClaw stack, right? So I've got this one, and then I have this guy, and I have this third one. Okay, now the way it works for me, at least, is I have these 3 OpenClaw agents. Each of these can spawn up to 5 sub-agents. Okay, and it's just the default config, but they can do up to 5 sub-agents. So I'll do, maybe I'll just do it visually. That would be interesting. So we'll do this, create 1, 2, oops, 3, and then, oh my God, it's a square packing exercise. Where do I put the 5th box? I just saw a really cool thing online about optimal square packing algorithms based on how many boxes you have. And it seemed to be the case. So a lot of times you would rotate the shape in some weird, unexpected way, like this. And that would allow you to get things nudged in just a little bit more in, something like that. So, in a way that I've been feeling as of late using these agents, I'm just going to say that that is a fair assessment for how the agentic software works, right? So what do we got here? We have OpenClaw, we have a primary orchestration agent. Each of these can spawn up to 5 sub-agents. So I'll put that over here, say 5 sub-agents, 5 sub-agents. That's a config, so technically it's n equals whatever, right? But we'll just call it 5. And so in that column, you can have up to, so in this suite, I can have 3 kind of orchestration higher level nodes. Each of those can spawn off 5 sub-agents. The sub-agents themselves could spawn off additional sub-agents, right? Like for example, if you have a sub-agent that spawns off quad code or codex or something, then you know, how many sub-agents is that? I don't know. Rabbit hole gets pretty deep pretty fast. But that's what I have been using for most of the competition, is this kind of setup, which is pretty manageable, right? It's what I consider like budget friendly. at least up until I really got into understanding how to really make use of things, and then I started running the limits. But it seems to work pretty good. I have a weird mix of operating systems for these guys. I've got one on a Mac Mini, of course. I got one on Ubuntu installed, and I have one on some older hardware, and then I have one on Windows. So that gives me access to three different operating systems that are all sandboxed into different partitions. Um, and each of those has sub-agents that can run on those operating systems. So it allows me to get access to capabilities that are native to each OS, which is pretty handy. Some weird, it's always some weird thing I want to do. And it's like, oh, if only I had a way. It's like, oh, I do have a way. I can just launch an agent on that operating system to do that task and get the job done. So, so that was for most of the competition was this kind of setup. And in fact, the pages that I've been building out on my site have been using this setup here. So I drop in like a Substack URL, and agent will parse down all the links. I provide my message, it pulls it all down, builds out the site, and goes from there. And that's been working pretty well. I ran into some issues. I don't know if I'll talk into those today because I probably want to talk about my Week4 submission, why it's just completely broken. But overall, I've been pretty happy with it. And in fact, I don't know why I would ever use a blog again, like a blogging software, WordPress, or what are some other ones? Blogspot, oh, that's still a thing. Blogger used to be a thing. What are some other ones? Gosh, it's been a while since I used some of these. There's some Markdown specific ones. I just don't see the purpose of that when I can just go to one of these agents and do a speech to text into a message and be like, hey, let's write an article that talks about this. And it has these features and it uses this kind of style. And then I, smash the send button and it kicks back a URL that has the content and image, some really good quotes from me. Just like, oh, okay, this is fantastic. So that's all happy path. So let's talk about where things break down. So I had this bright idea, like, hey, 5 sub agents kind of is interesting. And I've been trying to figure out how do I get over this. I have a limit over this like 10 agent limiter that I've been finding myself battling. Like, how do I get over this? Because the goal was to get to 100. How do I get to 100 sub agents running on task? Which is a preview for how things completely broke down. And I found some software called Paperclip, which I would encourage you to completely avoid if you want to maintain any sanity in your life whatsoever. But it's a really interesting software. So what the software allows you to do is to design virtual organizations. And I'll show one here in a moment of for virtual teams. So what I ended up doing was I took these 3 agents and I said, okay, what if we created, I'll put it over here and just start building out like a virtual org chart. What if for this project for Week4, what if I built out an entire virtual company, right? So did this, maybe I started out with a couple agents and then I'm like, well, maybe there's a better way to organize based on the type of project I was doing. And so what would happen is, draw the pen tool here. I would have a control plane. Oops, Bezier curves, no. My pen tool is not being friendly with me today. So, there we go. Not sure why that was giving me some trouble. So I would have one of my call agents would take on the role of coordinator, but all 3 would also be participants, right? So I would also have these 3 would be inside this virtual company. They'd also be outside the company as a control plane. So both as actors inside the company, but then also actors outside the company to help just manage day-to-day things with the organization. And the thought process was, I have a pitch. I'm going to turn the pitch over to the agents, and the agents are going to then build something. They sort of did. I'll say that. The first go around failed pretty miserably. So I actually had for the pitch, I had some ideas earlier in the week. So I had some code that was kind of like experimental to kind of see like, okay, does this actually work or not? But let me talk about the pitch, and I'll do that by pulling this up over to
Let's go up to GitHub, or not GitHub. Let's pull up Copilot for a minute. See, pull that up. All right. So here's the pitch. I thought it was kind of fun. So the pitch is Soundwave's midsummer stage, and the idea was that I would have Soundwave. I even have sprites somewhere. Where are the sprites in? It's in this one. Where are we at? Animation tester, reference code art, theme, oh, assets probably. Okay. I use Google Gemini to build out the sprite sheet. And then I used, I actually used OpenClaw. This is the craziest thing. I use OpenClaw with my more technically oriented agent that I have and had him build out. He used a vision model combined with this image, plus built out a custom detection to identify how to build the sprite sheet because the sprites were off just a little bit. And I didn't have time to go through and like fix pixel alignment, right? And so I told the AI, I said, hey, look, I don't have time to fix this sprite sheet for you. So can you just build an image detection algorithm to find the ideal center for each of the sprites and then build out a JSON file that just handles the problem? So it actually did. I still chuckle at this because I could, I was trying to think like, okay, this would probably take me forever. Like I'd still be 3 weekends in trying to figure out like how to build out like the optimal, centroid detection algorithm for sprites given an arbitrary sprite sheet. But somewhere, I don't know where at on the OpenClaw instance that hosts this guy, he has the code somewhere that allows him to actually just jam this out, which is pretty amazing. It's not using 5.4. I know that because I don't have that enabled. Lord knows I can't afford it right now. But it was awesome. It even worked for this one, right? So you look at this, it's got like different characters. It's got an alt mode cassette. It's actually just put the full sound wave down here. It's got different characters, animations. And that actually worked because I could pull up this animation tester page it wrote, the OpenClaw instance wrote, and it has like the ability that you can like check out the different animations and whatnot. But then also there's a cutscene system that has like different backgrounds too. So that was all done by just one OpenClaw instance. So I knew that would work, right? That was what I was experimenting with in week 3. Like I knew like that would take me down a path where I would get to a working result. But this week I wanted to scale out. So not so much like one agent that's just like really good at writing code, but I wanted to start thinking more broadly, like how do you manage or think about just huge amounts of agent software developers or product people building out things. And so that's where this pitch, where's the pitch at? Here. So I gave it the pitch, I gave it some reference code and a README. And the idea was that it would conceptually work. It wrote some source code, not much, right? I'm a little upset because it really didn't write a whole bunch of code. It ran some run books. I think that's, is there anything else here that's interesting? Oh, production viable. Oh, it did put some source code actually in the reference code section, which is weird. So I think the agents got confused about the reference code versus not reference code because some of this is not, you can see like there's some stuff here that it drafted up and you can see these ticket numbers, right? And I'll show the system here for Paperclip in a minute. It created some plans. It like went all in on optimize. So this is one of those cases where Elon talks about this. People spend a lot of time like trying to optimize the system before they actually build the system. And in this case, the agent spent all this time like optimizing a system before it was like even working. So that obviously didn't work out so hot. It looks like we got some different inside these goods. We've got some different capabilities. I haven't looked at a whole bunch of this code yet. I actually don't. This is the first time I've seen it with you. It looks like we are generating or obtaining somehow the fairy march percussion, a path from the production Bible, which is here. Oh, this is okay. It's not something that it's got some mappings for sound, some crossfades. It's got another README here of the story architecture. So this is probably what I consider like this. This is where most people are at, right? They're building like a small blueprint in Markdown, and then the agents will go around and create something. This isn't too bad. Oh no, but wait, this is all created by the OpenClaw agent because it's a signing role. So one of the things with the OpenClaw agent is that I asked it to create a production Bible because I was having trouble getting code to write to the project. Like, okay, well maybe despite having the task, the agents still don't really understand the nature of the task and just writing code anywhere on the system. So what I ended up doing is I said, hey, create a production Bible that has the different tasks and then like who should be doing the tasks. And that's what this, and it looks like it ends up being on top of the task system inside of Paperclip. So there's a story architecture. I think this would have been pretty cool if it would have worked, but it did not work. So that's pretty sad. I have a sad face for that. I don't know if the cutscene engine does kind of work. So I guess that I will note that it's there's a lot of math here. Um, you know, there's zero world where I would have just sat down and got this just to pop out of my brain. Zero. I would have taken a lot of iteration or some business to Stack Overflow, as it were. So that was not so great either. So let's talk now about like what went horribly wrong. I should just try to start this thing. So I don't think anything will run, but let me see. I'll start. Um, I had to go rescue this code off the box too because I can't go send a command to my OpenClaw agents because they're all credit maxed right now, and so all I have is just a flood of errors popping through that I have to go deal with. I tried setting up one of my more capable OLLAMA models, but it's like you go have a chat with it. It's like, oh, I see you want to have a chat with me. Here's different ways to have a discussion, and I don't have tooling capabilities that work quite well. Okay, this isn't great. Let's see, npm run, npm run dev. So let's see if this actually pops up here. If it does, I'll put up on a share, maybe. It's an empty React test app. Oh my gosh, this is terrible. Well, I'm going to show you this org chart anyway, so we can go to this browser and talk about virtual organizations and how they can fail. So this is the site. Obviously, it created the like really, I burned all that money for a demo site that doesn't really work. Such as it is. So I learned some lessons. I have some thoughts on how to fix it, but I just need some space, I think, at this point, to just think through like if I'm going to spend something like this back up again or not. But let me talk about the virtual organization. So you can see I've got errors flooding through here. Make sure this is actually sharing on screen before I continue. Okay, that's good. So this is Paperclip. Paperclip is an open source project you find on GitHub. It allows you to build out virtual organizations. What that means is, let's zoom in. You can have, so this is like a 3-tier organization. I consider this like maybe a small to mid-sized company. It's got 23 to 26 if you want to count the OpenClaw instances and their subagents. Maybe we get up to, closer to 40. But then again, like I said, each of these was invoking Codex or another command line tool. So I don't know, I might be around 100 subagents total, maybe more, plus API calls, right? So I'm on my second pot of coffee too. If you're competing in the competition, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So here's the thing. Inside these, you can go through and open up one of these agents cards, right? And it will show you their runtime. So this is a compliance daycare agent. The idea here was that it would go through and it would do like compliance checks on whether things were getting written right, whether or not the models were running. It failed. All the models are in a failure state. You can go through and configure some of these too, all of these, I shouldn't say some. So when you look at your org chart, for example, if I go to this QA automation engineer, right? So I go to my QA automation engineer. I can click on configure agent, and you can see here, this is its capabilities. It's just a text prompt. You can add a template, title, name. There's additional capabilities here. You can select different models. I can see it's running Py3 codec. I can do some additional prompts, add command line arguments. It's super powerful, right? You can, even set up agents to manage the paperclip instance. So if you can think for a minute that inside your organization, you may want to set up a PMO, and within your PMO, you'll have, I don't know, your head PMO officer, maybe it's executive project manager, whatever you want to title them. And then they would have API access back to effectively this Jira-like board. And they themselves could create their own Scrum teams if you're doing Scrum, or if you want to have project leads to track projects, like you could create a whole sub team that just do that. And that's interesting, I thought. One of the other kind of crazy things here, if I go back up, so just to kind of go back before we go forward again, you have this whole virtual organization. I've got, again, we'll call it 20. You know, there's more technically, but there's 20 agents, 20 employees, virtual employees inside this company. And the crazy thing is I can spin up multiple of these organizations. Obviously, I can't myself, but if you had access and a very large credit card, you could stand up, I don't know, you want 10 companies doing work for you, you could create an entire virtual supply chain, which is just crazy to think about, right? So what I mean by that is like, well, you could stand up a company that worked on, say, I don't know, what's a good common library that's in use or used to be big? Oh, Newtonsoft. You could stand up conceptually a virtual organization around Newtonsoft, right? Most engineers know what Newtonsoft is. So, and that virtual organization would handle issue intake, triage, testing, feature advancements, capabilities, and it would just run however often you wanted to run it off to the side. And you could snap that on to your other virtual organizations. This is part of a supply chain, right? If you connected your agent to external resources, it gets way crazier because you could go to your wholesalers, you could go to, if you have some front end distributors, if you have something like within your outlets for retail stores, right, you could tie all that together into multiple organizations. And so if you're a small company, I mean, you're effectively trying to figure out how to compete in this world that will be emerging when people, much larger firms have, and they already have these virtual companies, the entire supply chain has been virtualized, right? So you might think you're competing, but you really aren't, right? You're competing against, like, there's just no mechanism for competition. I don't see how that's going to work. So that will be interesting to see how that unfolds. I was talking to someone about this on Friday, and they suggest I spin up like a VC, what do they call it, a VC outreach company, just to find money so I could afford to spin up more organizations. I thought that was a cool idea. So it's kind of a bootstrapping problem right now because, as I mentioned, it's like the first freaking week, and I have broken all my budgets. In fact, I have a negative balance on OpenAI, which is not great. I have to figure out how I'm going to handle that. So we all make mistakes, right? So when you do process this stuff, this app is pretty cool. It does have, and it's it shows the charts. It shows what agents finished what. It shows 24 were enabled. It says my monthly spend is 0. That's a configuration problem. It shows when I ran them. So yes, in the span of not even 3 days, I exhausted all my budgets. So that's super awesome. It shows all the activity, and the activity really is the it's the reason for the exhaustion. So if you can imagine, just imagine the token burn for a minute, where it's 20 plus agents and their sub agents all executing commands in parallel on your task, right? And so what happens is, in an ideal world, is they'll come through and they will just grind through stupid amounts of tasks like they did last night until they ran out of capability. And then when they run out of capability, what happens? You get a whole bunch of errors. So you see here, I've got all these different errors are on screen. And that means that nothing is working because I have hit my quotas across different models and systems. And interestingly, when I try to set these agents to work with Olama, I found that the Olama, at least for the rig I have in the house, and I need to price up some hardware because I need something. I don't know what yet. The context windows that I'm able to support on hardware I currently have don't really allow me to use a system like this because by the time I explain like what the work item is, my token context windows are exhausted. If you're wondering, am I running on something like a 3070 or worse? And maybe I am running on something like that. So there's lots of new hardware options out there. I just need to figure out like what maybe I can pick up or obtain somehow. So that's something to look through. One of the other interesting things though around this system is this concept of goals. So in getting to a spot where I could understand how to set up this full virtual organization, I've actually found myself because I've been thinking about this for a while. For the last few weeks, I've been reading a lot about organizational theory and communication, which if you had asked me, like, would I be spending time, I have a lot of weird interests, but like reading about organizational structure was not really something I would find myself gravitating towards. But when you're building these virtual teams, you really do need to understand like organizational dynamics, right? And I think some of us who've been in big enterprise for however long have somewhat of an advantage because you've seen so many dynamics over time that you have an intuitive sense about the kinds of problems you get with different structures, right? Like I've seen small scale, I've seen mid-size scale, I've seen enormous scale, global teams and cross coordination over 24/7 periods and those kind of asynchronous issues that pop up. And I've seen the kinds of problems that you have with smaller scale teams, like a team of like 5 to 15, what happens there. And those journeys are all interesting, and they have lessons that you can apply to virtual organizations, right? But you can also, right, if you don't really want to go learn all that stuff, you can also just go to one of your agents and help you build up effectively a hiring manager or a consultant who's an organizational expert to give you some ideas about how to build out your virtual organization, which is, again, crazy times. When you first build out your initial organization, type your clip, I will note before I jump back to goals, you get a founding engineer as the first hire from the CEO. So the way it works, it's actually, this is kind of neat. The first agent you create as CEO, and then they get to hire their first person, which is a founding engineer. So it's a two-party system. At that point, you can create issues, which is like, hey, hire an executive producer, hire a QA automation engineer that reports to the executive producer, right? And the agents handle all that themselves. They build out the job spec, they figure out the capabilities, they start building out the organization chart. Excuse me. And so all that happens autonomously. And so if you were looking at a different, a company out in the real world, what you could do is like, oh, this is the org structure for that company, create a virtual clone of it, drop it in here. And if you have the inference, you're off to the races, right? So I expect this kind of world to emerge pretty quickly this year. There was a YouTube from one of the XAI researchers where they were talking about experimenting with this last year and how they were at much larger scales. And I got to thinking, like, just start thinking about this from a scale perspective, right? This is one company, right? Just to go back for a minute, this is one company. To zoom out for a minute, and I mentioned you can have 2 or 3, right? So you have 2 or 3, and I mentioned you could model a supply chain. But imagine if you had access to like a whole bank of GPUs. You could like model an entire state, city, county. I don't know how far you could go. You could go pretty far, right? Could you do an entire country? There's that saying, I think, from Dario about country full of geniuses, right? And this is how you could do that. You create all these virtual organizations. Some are businesses, some are like small mom and pop shops, some are nonprofits. They all serve a purpose, different research organizations. And then you click the go button and then you drop to the full country, like, okay, here's the problem I want you to solve. And then you just grind out on a solution. I can't even imagine what the token burn on that would be. It would be large. Now, getting back into the details of one of these organizations, there's the concept of goals. So when I first saw the goal, I didn't really understand the purpose of this. Like, why? What is it that these goals do? And then this is not probably a great example of goals. It was just the initial set, and then I started looking into like what is it these goals are actually doing within a context of paperclip. And the way I understand it is that it goes through and creates like a North Star for the different phases an agent is working on, or even the handoffs. So as you build out more complex structures, these agents are assigning tasks to each other. And for example, let's pull up a task here. So I go to issues. Let's see if I can find a good one. Let's make this production Bible. Look at all my runs are failing. So you can see it created this whole story. For anyone that's worked in a Jira-like environment, you're probably envious about the amount of detail that's happening here. It looks like we did a handoff to a system engineer over here. Pull this up to issue 99. System engineer did some work down here on the story as a nice comment. Again, this is all just happening. Oh, there's a deliverables folder. I didn't see that. Should pull that up. Here, let's did I copy that? I don't see that in my the source. Huh. I wonder where that folder's at. There. I don't see that here in the code I rescued. So one of the things I didn't learn until late Friday was that you can specify your working path. And so for Thursday night, it was everybody was working in different folders. And that was just that was catastrophe, right? Whoops. And then it was, well, now they're all, I thought we're working in the same folders, but apparently not. So sometime last night, this guy was working in a folder. I don't even know where that's at. So I'll have to go find that. Okay. So goals are like OKRs. So in some enterprises use an OKR system. And the idea with those, and there's actually software that probably could be vibe coded that allows an organization to track OKRs throughout different tiers within their executive branches, within their organization to try to track alignment, right? The goal is my organization moving along stepwise towards the North Star that the people at the top have identified is the direction the organization needs to move to, right? Because they're steering a very large ship. Once you get to thousands of employees, you need to have some sort of way to help guide all the different teams and the politics that happen. And, it's just part of being in a large human-based system, all that organization towards an outcome, right? Well, what's the outcome? Well, that's where the OKRs. So you have like your high level, I've got this as an objective, like the chief executive officer will say, hypothetically, we need more sales. Great. Sales are great. Chief sales officer, chief revenue officer will say, okay, well, we're going to have more sales by targeting a 20% increase in revenue and increase our top line funnel by say, I don't know, 40%. And then that will go down to say like a sales manager, just small organization, right? Just for illustration purposes. And then the sales manager will go, well, if we're going to increase our funnel by 40%, that means I need to have, an additional 5 outbound calls per week, right? And then that all the math should work out from there. So the OKRs are along those lines. And so it allows for an organization to talk with each other across time and space. And that's kind of how I view this goal system here. It's very much an OKR-based system. I don't have great OKRs, but it allows you to create sub goals inside here. So you have this high level goal. And again, like an OKR, you have different sub goals so that everybody's marching in tune. And I didn't set that up. I did an initial pass, actually had one of my open call agents because with the API, you can set all this. It's like, hey, look, just set up your initial set of goals and let's see what happens. Because I had no idea, right, what the outcome would be. I did create, and I thought this was fun, I did create an open call manager. So the idea with this was in the 21 million input tokens. That's crazy. The idea at the time was that it would have 3 reports, which are Kira, Solomine, and another agent, which I don't think I ended up adding. to this instance, not just through the API. I don't think I actually have it set up. So they would all report to this OpenClaw manager. And I thought that was a really neat little concept. And the reason why I did that was I had thought, kind of, you think about like when you hire contractors or consultants, you usually have like a vendor procurement person. And I was like, well, I don't know if I need it, but maybe there's going to be a handoff between different levels of the organization, and they'll want to funnel some of that conversation to the manager, who will then work with the agents. But that's not at all how it ended up working out. The way it ended up working out is these like independent consultants were so high powered that they kind of broke the organization. And so I just would manage them myself, and then they had certain roles within the agent tree. But it got me thinking a lot about capability of individuals, both in reality, but also in virtual org structure. So again, when you get to the spot that you level yourself up from I'm working with code tools to get to an outcome to I'm working with skill files to build out skills, you reach a point where it's like you get to autonomy of having something like there's a whole bunch of them now, but something like an OpenClaw agent. And that OpenClaw agent is great. And then you learn about sub agents. And then the next thing is like, well, I'm only one step away from a virtual organization. So what do I do to build one of those up? And the next thing you know, you're learning about organizational theory, structure, and everything else. And then as you go, you realize like, oh, I've just exhausted all my budget for, well, in some cases for the week or month. So I need to figure out some things. But I'm surprised there's a task in progress. Oh, that's assigned to me. That's why. But it got me thinking about a different way to structure a virtual team. And I don't know if this is where I'll end up at. I have some things I need to fix. But let's go back to the Figma for a minute and talk through. We'll talk through this. And then I think I'll have time to talk through my other failure case. And I actually don't know if I will. I don't think I will because I want to cover something else, which I'll pull up on the screen here in a moment. And I'll just note for this video's sake that I actually had another project I had done where it was a 80s cassette with a full emulation of a magnetic tape, the magnetic tape reader. And you can load an audio, it encodes it into a custom audio encoder. And then when you click fast forward, you can hear it fast forward like you would a cassette. But the problem is the event structure of the UI. It's like both myself and 3 different AI tools, we've all coded ourselves into a corner because it kind of works, but it mostly doesn't, right? Like like I can hear the audio play, I can see the magnetic strip play, I can see fast forward kind of work. A lot of it's just hacky simulations. It's not actually like a full emulation of the real thing. So I thought it would be kind of cool. It didn't quite work though. So that was another case where then that was only using 2 AI models, Codex and Copilot, to try to drive towards the result. And both of those ended up not working well. Got stuck. I haven't tried 5.4. I'm curious if 5.4 can take that as a base and just get a working version. But I want to talk about this other idea that I have, which do this. Come back to the select box and just copy this guy from that. So I had mentioned that I have this like what I would consider like the Codex 5.3 of the world, right? Codex 5.3, Opus 4.6. So when you're working with these are your higher power models. They do lots of different things. But then I started doing something where it was like, okay, I have code. Oops, put this text on the screen here. I was like, okay, well, let's have some smaller scale models like GPT-5 Mini or Codex Mini, right? Something smaller that didn't cost as much, but was still an option. And then I started thinking about some more like, well, maybe I could have some agents that are like just pure OLAMA series, right? So come back here. Ooh, why can't I do the things? Click on this OLAMA series. This is usually right now. This is Quinn for the most part. So I've got Quinn up to 9B. Um, those are not bad, not bad, not great. Um, again, probably when I don't have 20 agents trying to issue requests, probably would not crash my box, but that's something I need to work on. So when I was looking at this and I was talking to my wife about it, I was like, what's really interesting about this is like I could reconceptualize this in a really interesting way, which is this is the professional series. This is the pro league, right? Um, this is maybe this is like my college ball league here. We'll say this is the college level, right? We've got some college folks now at this level, and then the Olama series, which maybe that's my K through 12, K through 12, K through 12, and it, just in terms of capability, right? It's like, well, and especially with the release of 5.4, you can conceptually does everything, but and it kind of made sense. I was like, oh, okay, so it's kind of like I've got my professional football team, I've got like an amateur team, or maybe my college ball team, and then K through 12, I have my Pee Wee sport team, and they have different capabilities, right? Kids still learning, you're still learning, everything just kind of goes along that direction. But when you think about it from this frame, what you get is a different way to even conceptualize how to do this organization here, right? So if I take this structure and then I move that over to here, what you see is that, okay, this is probably the top box at the top is the Codex, is the Pro League, right? Opus, Codex, newer models or your professionals. Right underneath them are your college educated folks. The maybe this is your college football team, college basketball team. Then you go down one step from there, and then you got your front end workers who, maybe they got a K through 12 education, or it's just like the Pee Wee sports, right? And that was the theory, was that you could organize that way. And the thought process I had was that quantity beats not having anything when it comes to an agentic system, because at least it started. But just like a real organization, if if they produce artifacts at the bottom rung of your organization that are crap, right? We've all been on a team at some point where you have someone who was producing something, you get a copy of it, it's either code or it's a PowerPoint or whatever, and you look at this and you're like, well, I'm, I'm glad that you at least tried to submit something. And then you realize you're just going to have to completely rework it, right? It's directionally misaligned, the content's off, nothing quite works. And so you end up paying for it in your middle management tier, right? And so these guys have to do a little bit more work, but even they can get it wrong, right? And so the next tier of the organization has to come back and do a pass and get that fixed. Now, the thing that I've been wrestling with in my head is that, well, at the pace new models come out, like, why do you even need any of this, right? You could have an organization like this, or what you could do is you could wait 3 months, and then suddenly you've got big brain, right? Draw the box, it's the same size as the organizational chart, and big brain can just do everything. And cost wise, yeah, I think that there's probably an argument for that. So I don't have a clear answer on that one either, but that's a really interesting place that I'm at today and trying to make sense of how this works, right? Like, okay, so there's a balance between designing an entire virtual company to capabilities of newer models. Like a newer model might actually have the full capability in the entire organization as we knew it even 5 years ago. And I've seen some videos pop up online where startup founders are like, I had a team of 5 to 10. We had 2 years, $8 million in funding. We tried to make something. It didn't work. I used 5.4 and I got it done in 20 minutes, right? So clearly there's some sort of weird balance there. I don't know what that is, but it's a really interesting puzzle. The other interesting thought, which I've explored a little bit, is okay, but what if you have an existing very complex environment that you can model an organization on top of, and then you could feed into that? It's like, okay, this is the intent or the outcome I'm trying to get to, and then get back a result, right? So if you had like just a whole bunch of stuff,
that you needed to like go look at and do. Like and you had all these capable agents that are all individuals that were kind of hyper optimized for the domain. You could probably get to a pretty killer outcome. What you're not going to get though is a killer outcome by just throwing up agents, giving them a prompt and going. I think one of the big lessons I've learned over the last 4 weeks is that if I come back to these guys here, the onboarding process is real. If and it takes probably, I don't know, if you're actively doing it, you might get to a spot of what I consider like productive gold in about 3 days. But it might take a little bit longer depending on your use cases because I have one agent still not quite where I want it. And the onboarding process is you and your agent coming to a degree of homeostasis because it has to learn enough about you and the problem space you want it to operate in. And then you have to learn how to communicate with it. And that process takes time to reach that equilibrium where suddenly things are really clicking, right? And once you hit that spot, you'll know. And it's like, oh, this is the most amazing thing ever because it just solved this problem I have. And the next day you have that experience again. Like every day you have these just amazing golden experiences, which is part of why OpenClaw right now is just going bananas. So when I look at the OpenClaw series and getting these agents trained, what I've considered doing is like, well, I could just copy the entire digital brain of one of these agents and then just copy paste that 25 times with different roles, right? And I don't think that would work. I don't think that would work. And the reason why I think that is because in a way, the agent is grown, right? It's almost like a human. They've been grown into a certain kind of person. And so it'd be like copying me 25 times. No one needs that, right? So it's like, I think you could maybe get away with a few, but you couldn't do a lot. And I think that's another interesting failure case. And you can't just port it. You can't. I found a way to use AI to build out like a fully trained agent because AI doesn't know what you need, right? There's that distance between the digital AI and what it's capable of and like real world. And it just doesn't seem to be able to overlap the two. So, one other thing. So I got into just I started this channel right before the competition kicked off, and I did it because I was like, there was a public speaking thing in there. It's like, hey, do something that you wouldn't normally do, and I was like, well, I don't think I've ever done YouTube before, like, so why don't I try doing that, and I will just talk about a book each time, and we'll go from there. So I thought it would be good to talk briefly about one of the current management books that I'm reading. It's called The Goal: Process of Ongoing Improvement. It's written, I think, in the when was that written? 80s, 80s or 90s. There's a distinct lack of cell phones, so it had to be in, as I'm told, the 1900s, right? But what I find interesting about this, I'm not done with the book. I've actually gone back over some pages because let me put this on screen. I'll explain why. So when you start thinking about virtual organizations for software, you should put time into thinking about it in terms of manufacturing. I've read a lot of books now on this, and software production within a virtual company effectively is a kind of factory. Like it's an optimizations problem, right? As I mentioned, like, well, here, let's just flip this over on the screen for a minute and I can show you an exact real world problem that I got right now, right? Which is, you can see at the top here, I've got these agents and quota exceeded, quota exceeded, quota exceeded, quota exceeded, run failed, run failed, run failed, run failed, bunch of run failures. So that would be like, if you're in a manufacturing facility and the robots that you have on the floor, right? I think everyone's been in a manufacturing facility. They are at production capacity or they're down, right? What do? How does the factory work? Well, the factory could be out of work because the robots that make it possible are all down.
And it got me into reading a bunch of books. The Goal is one of those. And well, there's a comment in here that I'll just talk about today. I don't want to talk about the whole book, but where's it at? How do I, can I not scroll? Can I not scroll my annotations? Apparently not. Let me try this. Okay. Apparently I can't scroll my annotation when that Zoom hides my scroll bar. Zoom down here a little bit. Here we go. This comment, which I thought was really interesting. Okay. The comment is that inventory moves through the system not in flows, but in waves. So what's the inventory for a software manufacturing, right? And I have different answers for that question because I think there's different answers for what that really means. But thinking about it as a wave and not like a constant drip feed makes a lot of sense because it's just how humans typically operate. Now, when it comes to a virtual organization filled with agents, the wave looks a bit more like a fire hose, where you take the hose and you connect it, and then the fire department opens it up, and the water spraying out, and it's just this massive flow of water going out. But fundamentally, it's still a kind of wave, right? Because even the agents will have to pick up work. There's a task settlement that happens because as one agent finishes, there may be handoffs. And so what you start to see are these wave-like patterns that appear. It looks like noise unless you start to kind of take a step to the side and observe what's happening. And then you start to see that there's these oscillations happening within the organization. And your job then becomes like, how do you optimize the system in a way to either take advantage of that or get out of the way of a wave, right? Like if it's a tsunami, like what do you do? Or what happens if the wave comes in and then or the water, like the tides, maybe when you exhaust all your quota, is it like the tide? Like the tide's gone out, there are no waves, right? There's no water anywhere until you get the quota fixed. So there's a lot to remark about. There's something about Herbie and whatnot. I don't want to talk about that because the broader point here is just that when you're dealing with a virtual organization, you necessarily are going to find yourself reading about organizational theory, which as a practicing technologist probably isn't where you thought you would be at, but this is 2026 and the reality of today's world. So I got my book in according to the requirements that kicked off the channel. So got that covered. Covered my Week4 competition notes, which will be a whole bunch of broken code. I will figure out how to submit something that's quasi working by tomorrow. But otherwise, I hopefully seeing a real world, like here's all the ways this stuff doesn't work kind of video with AI has been at least a little bit informative. I don't know if any of the solutions I mentioned actually will work. I just know that that's next step once I go through my to-do list, which has I have a whole list already laid out this morning. I noted out of all the things I need to do to fix the agents that are currently blocked because of different problems, all stemming from one core issue, or the Herbie of my current system, which is I got no inference. What am I going to do about that? Well, I need to start working on that. So that's my plan for today. First, I got to get my day ready. So it's an early morning video. Ciao.